Hello, and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponder. I'm the host, Neil Trotter. And today, we're going to be talking about some current affairs, right? Some geopolitics that's going on right now. But of course, we're going to always do it under a philosophical lens. I'll just show you the book. It's Palestine and Socialist Introduction. Let me see. Okay, that's a good way to do it. Palestine and a Socialist Introduction. It's edited by Sumaya Awad and Brian Bean. Now, first and foremost, I align with in solidarity with the Free Palestine movement. Of course, there's a lot of conflict and horror and turmoil and genocide and lots of suffering that's happening right now in that area, and Israel, and the war between the state of Israel and Hamas, but really just the suffering the state of Israel is causing to the Gaza area. And you can go back and forth about how the Hamas movement, or whatever you want to call it, is they've done bad and wrong, and they've done some atrocities or lots of pain and suffering as well that they cause. So has the state of Israel. But if we want to talk about root cause and what is the true reason why this is all happening, right? This suffering that's going on in the Middle East area, it's really the Israeli state colonizing the Palestinian people and Palestinian land, and until that's really recognized, right? Until by people in power, right? Until that's addressed, there's some remedy that goes toward that, actually freeing Palestinian people from the colonial rule of the state of Israel. This type of violence will continue to happen, and it'll continue to just take place. So that's the first and foremost. We got to acknowledge that. Free Palestine for sure. But now, what we want to do is we want to, on this channel, since this is a philosophy channel, we want to focus on the philosophy and the branch of philosophy for sure that is I like to talk about is political philosophy. And this book right here talks about, it tries to introduce Palestine and basically the Palestinian conflict that's been going on, in its latest iteration for like a good 75 years, right? But even before then, with the British colonization and all that, but it tries to, give you a introduction of the modern conflict through a socialist lens, through socialist framework, and I think that's a great way to really understand the issue that's going on. And so this is a great book to recommend. I would recommend to somebody who just doesn't know what's going on. With this conflict, and you're seeing the news and you're like, what? I don't understand what's going on. This is a great book. Now, you can actually get this for free right now. The publisher released it for free. Haymarket Books, right? Just go to their website. You can just download this for free because they're trying to spread the word. They're trying to let people know what's up. And I appreciate that. So yeah, I got mine for free. And we're going to talk about that. So here in the Black Ponder, what we do is we read quotes. Right, we read quotes, and then we talk about the quotes, and we add our supplementary commentary here in the video and also in the comment section below. So feel free to join in on the discussion. So the first thing we want to understand is like what is socialism, or how do we define socialism, right? Well, it really does depend on who you ask, and even people who claim, who identify as socialist or who believe in socialism as a, the way to go in terms of organizing a society. There's conflict and, disagreement among that, right? So how do they define socialism? Let's read. Okay, so the issue is, because I got the book for free, it's like PDF, ebook versions. Page numbers are, there are no page numbers. So how can I reference this? I can just say this is from the introduction. right? And that's all I can say, because I know there's people who are like, please give me the page number so I can follow along. I'm not sure how. I clearly can't do that. I can just tell you it's from the introduction here. I'm just going to read here. But yeah, I'll encourage you to get the book. Different from conceptions of socialism, like the social democracy of the Scandinavian mixed economies, and differ from the former USSR and North Korea, often referred to as Stalinist countries, or the current Chinese state, which can be generally described as a capitalist dictatorship, with certain sectors of the economy owned by the state, whose role is to integrate the private sector into the world economy. All of these forms can be described as socialism from above, right? State control of some part of industry through a top-down, bureaucratic, and more often than not authoritarian stratum of society. So yeah, we're talking about the more Stalinist flavor of socialism, which is kind of like a more Marxist-Leninist type of socialism. And they even say, they call it Stalinism. Right? A political tendency based on a false notion, so they say is false in their point of view, that socialism can be established in a single country rather than through the international rejection of capitalism. Right? And, you're getting, even certain Marxist-Leninists will say, well, I do believe in the internationalist rejection of capitalism. So there's disagreement in between within the schools of socialist thought. But yeah, they reject this idea like you can create socialism through just one country, and there needs to be like an international focus, right? A rejection of capitalism. So Stalinism often takes a rigid approach to socialist revolution, regarding it as a marked by distinct stages, right? Stages, quote, first, socialists fight for national or anti-colonial liberation. Then at some later date, they start to struggle for socialism. This mechanistic model relegates the project of fighting for socialism to something that will take place at a future, often undefined point in time. Following this stagism has taken a particular toll on the socialist and communist parties. So yeah, the whole we gotta, the whole process is a stepwise situation, and if the progress isn't going according to the steps, right, which is certain schools of thought in socialism, they kind of follow this process and then they fixate on the certain levels of stages, and that causes stagnation in progress, right? And then I skip down a bit. On the side of national unity, instead of emphasizing the importance of internal conflicts between classes and seeing struggle from below of the workers and the oppressed as the answer, okay? So we're talking about, the way they see the socialism is like, look, it starts from the bottom up, right? It doesn't start from the top down. Like you can't fixate on this vanguard or this leader elite, an elite in terms of knowledge, right? That's gonna top down type of approach. No, it needs to start from the bottom up, from the oppressed. So, this is how they distinguish their flavor of socialism, their school of thought of socialism, which that's the one I'm in alignment with as well. Then they get into the concept of imperialism. All right, it's an important definition. Let's talk about imperialism. We view imperialism as the unrelenting process of competition and conflict between the world's capitalist classes of different states, who are vying for domination and exploitation of the globe's people, wealth, and resources. We see the major capitalist states as competing with each other in subjugating less powerful states and peoples to their rule. Our understanding of imperialism is rooted in the theories originally formulated by Marx, Lenin, and Bukharin, which see imperialism not as a policy chosen by states, but as a system rooted in economics that dictates the policy of states. Right? So imperialism is not some sort of okay, now we're going to be this way, we're imperialists now. No, imperialism is a mode of economics that you just go into as you follow down the capitalist way of operating. While military might and conquest are the sharpest edge and most visible expression of this competition and subjectation, imperialism is not only carried out through the barrel of a gun. Economic tools are in some ways the preferred, less messy method implemented by institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And the policies of trade deals, zones, tariffs, and the like are also weapons the ruling classes use for domination. The ruling classes pursue this economic and military violence, to quote Lenin, not out of particular malice, but because the drive for expansion occurs in a world already divided up by capitalism and colonialism, one that makes it imperative that they adopt this method in order to get profits. So, and I put in my notes here, imperialism is inherent within capitalism, okay? So capitalism necessitates imperialism. That's this concept of like, if you continue down the road of capitalism, right, and you keep, some terms are like hyper capitalism or like late stage capitalism. If you let capitalism run its course, eventually it'll become imperialism, right? And it's like, it's you not deciding you're an imperialist state. It's just you following down the line of the capitalist mode or methodology of social economics, right? And so to continue to quote, we do not understand imperialism as some do as a trait of only some camps of capitalist states and not other camps. If you have a ruling class integrated into the world economy, then that ruling class must compete, and it is driven into the structure of imperialism. So yeah, if you operate within the capitalist framework, inevitably you will start doing imperialist enterprises, right? Understanding how imperialism and capitalism work together is key to not allying with despots and remaining on the side of the people who face the war and devastation created by the system. Put simply, imperialism breeds war and devastates the working class and the oppressed all over the world. As long as capitalism exists, so will imperialism. It's a point of view that capitalism inevitably matures or results in imperialism. So, what's this got to do with Palestine and the Palestinian conflict and the state of Israel? Let's talk about Zionism. Like, what is Zionism? The book talks about this, tries to define it for us. Zionism, first, that the right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. This is quotes. So in other words, that the right to self-determination does not apply to Palestinians. Okay. Second, that the state language is officially Hebrew, downgrading Arabic to a language with special status, quote unquote. Third, the state views the development of Jewish settlement as national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. So Zionism is these things. It's the right to establish a state at the expense of other people who may be there already, but don't fall into the state, right? Or the people that want to establish the state, right? And then the second is downgrading the language, and not just the language, maybe the culture as well, and promoting like a national value. Like we're not just people, we're a nation, like developing nationalism, right? But this is for Jewish people. But this sounds a lot like other colonial establishments or imperialist ventures, like America. British settlers came to America. Those settlers developed colonies. Those colonies were like, okay, we need to develop a state, right? A state, right? And then we need to prioritize our language, and the people that are already here, their language, that's irrelevant, right? In fact, we're going to force those people to disregard their language or whatever. and culture. And then they, the British colonizers encouraged and promoted nationalist values in the place of their colonization, creating their own state. And so Zionism follows that framework. This is important to understand. We need to look honestly at the history of Zionism, a movement that has allied itself in every case and at every moment in its history with the powers of world imperialism, a project that has built its very existence on the colonization of another people, the Palestinian people, on the obliteration of their history, their culture, and their land. Sounds quite familiar, right? But this is, and this is the point of the book, right? Zionism is imperialism, right? And it's not unique. It's not unique. And they want you they're trying to put it in a socialist framework, trying to make you understand through a socialist lens. Like, that's how we're going to be able to understand the situation. Okay, but then the book talks about the roots of modern day Zionism. Okay. Zionism is not a historic yearning to return to Zion, quote unquote, but a modern movement that was born in the last quarter of the 19th century, right? Because now this is like the state of Israel, right? Although we're saying like imperialism is nothing new, right? But this version of imperialism, this is pretty modern. This Israeli state, not even like Jewish state necessarily, but state of Israel, which is not necessarily aligned with the interests of like all Jewish people, which we'll talk about later. The development of Zionism as a political movement was entirely a product of European society in the age of imperialism, and it is impossible to understand outside of this context. So let's talk about this more. It's the same chapter, I just moved down a bunch. Right? Again, no page numbers. But I encourage you, download the book. I'll leave a link below how you can get the book. The United States' backing of Israel for the past half century has not been, as some have argued, due to the whims of certain U.S. presidents or the influence of the Zionist lobby, though the Israel lobby, including institutions like American Israel Public Affairs Committee, does impact U.S. politics, particularly in their encouragement of anti-BDS, BDS meaning boycott, divestment, and sanction, a movement to boycott, divest, and sanction the state of Israel in all of its capitalist pursuits, right, in protest of their colonization of the Palestinian people in Palestinian land. But just to break that down for you, so anti-BDS legislation and the scapegoating of Arab and Muslim students and activists. It is by no means the driving force behind bipartisan support for Israel. Both Republicans and Democrats have unconditionally supported Israel. Obama vastly increased funding for Israel, even as it carried out 3 major assaults on Gaza under his watch. U.S. support for Israel is in service of the interests of the U.S. ruling class, which needs an unconditional ally to retain its imperialist power in the Middle East and worldwide. Right? So again, we got to look at it from that socialist lens. That's what's going on. So any serious challenge to Israel's apartheid regime then must also challenge the U.S. imperialism and its backing of the Israeli state. So too must it challenge regional capitalist powers and the system of imperialism that, as a whole, prevents democratic movements from taking shape wherever they might emerge. So we got to look at this from a socialist lens. And if we're not looking at it from that perspective, then we're really not addressing the problem. We're seeing all this violence that's occurring, and then people are saying this, that, and the other thing. But if solutions aren't related or in reference to like socialism or like anti-imperialist action or even anti-capitalist action, then we're not really going to go anywhere, right, in terms of like ending the violence that's going on. A fundamental challenge to the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship will thus necessarily come with a transformation of global relations of domination. An end to the role of the U.S. as an imperialist power, and an end to imperialist domination and rivalry of the Middle East. And then I put in my notes here. So the current Israel-Hamas war is not new. It is part of a century-plus long system of imperialism, right? And any hope to end Palestinian oppression must begin with addressing the system of imperialism, right? So that's what we need to understand. So, you know, the problem is you have socialism as this boogeyman, or this like taboo word that people don't want to say. And of course this is by design, right? This is like intentional. You make root cause analysis, you make it taboo, and you make it controversial, so people don't want to even go there, and so you never actually solve the problem. And so that's where I would argue political philosophy comes in, where it's like, no, we have to actually like really discuss the meaning behind what's going on, and the philosophical, political situation. It's only when we understand the reality of the situation and not shut down by taboos and controversies or that aren't real, or that are fabricated, right? Then we can start addressing the root cause, right? Or start trying to solve this problem that's like devastating. So what else do I mean when I say like taboo or controversial, right? You know, it's well known, like you say, you start talking against Zionism, or you start being anti-Zionist, right? You know, that's equated to being anti-Semitic, right? That's saying like, oh, you don't like the state of Israel, that means you don't like Jewish people. Or you like anti-Semite or something. And this is like a way of like discouraging people from actually addressing the problem. You know, demonizing the solution, right? Of course, you know, I have several friends who are Jewish who are anti-Zionist, right? Zionist, the state of Israel, does not represent all the interests of Jewish people. That's like, you know, very similar to, you know, I mean, let's look at America. Like, does the state of America address the interests of all Americans? Like, you know, if you say like, you know, I don't like the way American operates, are you saying like, oh, you hate all Americans? Like, no, right? So that same kind of, you know, logic applies here, but it's definitely a way to discourage the solution, because of course it goes against imperialist interests. So how did this happen, right? Of course we just said like, well, it goes against imperialist interests, but how is it that like so many working class people, not, and a lot of these people aren't even Jewish, right? There are you know, working class Americans, right, working class Europeans, how do they adopt this concept of, oh, you're talking bad about the state of Israel? Oh, you don't like Jewish people, you're anti-Semite. Like, so, and then how does that fall in line with the whole notion of this is a socialist struggle, right? Fighting the state of Israel is a socialist thing, but then you would say like, well, isn't socialism serving the working class? And there's a lot of people who are working class people who are for the state of Israel. So how does that work? So this is how we've got to really dive into the situation, right, and examine it from a political, philosophical point of view. Right? So let me read you this. So this is chapter 3. The Israeli working class stands apart from others for 3 reasons. First, examining the formative years of the Jewish working class in Palestine, we can see that it is the nature of a settler working class and its unique relationship to the state that distinguishes the Israeli proletariat from other working classes. 2 things to think about here. You know, the working class is not like a monolith, right? The working class is differentiated. And then the second thing to consider is the history of the working class in certain areas and environments, right? We got to really start thinking about the history. But then here in the quote it says, second, the 1967 occupation served to deepen the connection between the working class and the colonial state. Finally, the Palestinian national liberation struggle negates the privileges of, and therefore is opposed by, the colonizing working class. So let's really examine this. Okay, I'll continue reading here. Many modern working classes, such as those in the US, Australia, or Canada, have their origins in settler colonies. The Israeli experience presents a variant of this. Sociologist Gershon Shafir identifies 5 different forms of settler societies. The military occupation, the plantation, the ethnic plantation, the mixed settlement, and the pure settlement. The occupation strives to exploit and intensify the existing economic order rather than seeking direct control of local land and labor, meaning that it does not replace the existing society, but merely exploits it. In the plantation settlement, the European settlers imported indentured or slave labor and constituted themselves as a local ruling elite. In the ethnic plantation settlement, the mixed settlement, and the pure settlement, the goal is to erect a society to be dominated by a European national identity. In the ethnic plantation settlement, local labor is employed, but the settlement possesses a European identity, which rejects ethnic mixture. In the mixed society, some form of caste system is established, coercing local labor to comply, along with a certain degree of interracial relations. The pure settlement establishes an economy based on European labor, removes the native population, and establishes a sense of cultural and ethnic homogeneity identified with a European concept of nationality. This is European societies consciously replace indigenous ones with an exclusive society. Significantly, what we will see is that this form of settlement requires an integral laboring class committed to the nation-building project. Okay? So we're going in deep, trying to analyze this situation. So Marxists should not identify these examples as fixed realities, rather as a spectrum over which a settlement can evolve. Okay, so again, it's like with the whole stepwise, some of the socialist schools of thought is various stages that are fixed. But a more in-depth and I would say argue realistic understanding of socialism and capitalism even, or just like social economics or geopolitics, it's constantly evolving, right? But there are these patterns that we see, which is being brought up here. So there are many ways that a settler can exploit the place where it settles for like resources and capital, right? In America, right, they talked about how they brought in indentured servants and slaves, right? And then they built this national identity based off of the ruling class. That's one way. As we see with the state of Israel and Zionism, the settlers come in and they devalue the culture and the language of the native people in service of creating their own state. So then the settlers, to justify their exploitation, have to go in line with this devaluation or just downright exploitation of the native people, right? And the settlers who are working class, right, they have to start falling in line with the exploitation of a ruling class too, to justify the exploitation that they're doing, right? Because they're part of the labor force. Let's continue how that plays out by reading more of the book here. In the early years, the welfare structure, which offered Israeli workers high living standards, worked in conjunction with state subsidies of capital, creating a cocoon for business. The absence of a Zionist capitalist class, the state in making took it upon itself to control investment, but This control was not antagonistic to private capital. To the contrary, from 1948 on, the state pursued policies aimed at nurturing a capitalist class by encouraging a few key families to undertake joint projects and investment with state and quasi-state enterprises. This paternalism continued into the 1980s when the independent capitalist class emerged like a moth from a cocoon. In the process of developing capital, a real capitalist class materialized to rule where previously labor had dominated. Initially, personal corruption was absent from the process of foreign funds funneled into state-sponsored enterprises, but it led to a great deal of political and social corruption. The generals who took over industry and the wealthy families they became connected to emerged from the era of privatization as an extremely corrupt, all-powerful elite, aided rather than encumbered by labor. The privatized state enterprises and businesses that benefited from the cocoon came to be dominated by this small circle. So you're starting to get the history of how the labor working class developed into this elite class, right? Or how the working class differentiated itself. Certain people within the working class that identified with the ruling class became part of the elite class themselves. State-led economic development in Israel's formative years helped to build a private corporate capitalism that shaped the Israeli political economy. Since the mid-1980s, orthodox free market policies have changed the relationship of Israeli workers to the Zionist welfare state. Israeli workers have suffered attacks on their social rights and benefits, but they continue to enjoy benefits at the expense of Palestinians. Many have enjoyed social mobility that is de facto denied to Palestinians. At the same time, a political economy based on war and occupation provides new ways of integrating the Israeli working class into the Zionist project. This is quite similar to how, in America, you had like slaves that were brought into America to do work, right, in the early stages of the United States of America. So you had slaves come in, but you also had indentured servants from other European nations. Like a lot of non-British European immigrants came into America as indentured servants. And they were all part of this working class. Early on, like a lot of these indentured servants, like Irish immigrants and whatnot, were finding solidarity with a lot of like the African slaves, right? And the ruling class was like, let's not have these people get too powerful. So then the concept of whiteness developed, the white race. And in a lot of these indentured servants who were of European descent identified as white, and then they associated with the ruling class, the British colonizing class, and so they're like, okay, we're white now, and then that differentiated themselves from African slaves, and that's a lot of how the concept of race played out in the United States of America, because early days of America, like Irish immigrants were called the N-word, right? But that was, it's all, you start to could see so if we continue to call non-British people the N-word, they're just going to join with a lot of these slaves and they're going to revolt against us. So we need to create this concept where they can somewhat identify with us and maybe form a sense of nationalism based off of whatever, in the United States of America, whiteness, white supremacy. And so in the state of Israel, when we talk about the concept is being an Israeli, identifying with this notion of Zionism, right? Being a part of a state of Israel. And so I have this state But what about the people that were already there, right? What about the Palestinians and their culture? Don't they have a right to exist too, right? And so it's that same kind of like playing out of the working class identifying with the ruling class because they retrieve some sort of benefit, some sort of capitalist benefit from doing that. But it's at the expense of exploiting other people, whether that be like black people in America or Palestinian people in the state of Israel. No longer is foreign aid directly invested in the working class. Israeli workers are now rewarded through the arms economy. This is why, despite the economic degradation of neoliberalism, the working class remains as committed as ever to Zionism. The working class has become dependent on the education, housing, and career opportunities that are present in the IDF affords them. The IDF is the People's Army or the military of Israel. They have found routes for advancement in the military-fueled high-tech industry, with more than 9% of workers concentrated in high-tech. And as pensions and real wages are eroded, the cheaper cost of settlement living in the occupied territories has become essential. But the key here is, I will read, the denial of freedom to one is the precondition of the livelihood of the other. Okay? That's what, we need to understand. Like, there's this working class, there's segments of the working class that identify with the ruling class. And by doing that identification, they get some capital gains, but at the expense of other people's denial of freedom, right? And in the case of the state of Israel, is the denial of Palestinians' freedom. And this is similar, it's like a mirror image. I mean, it's not like exactly a mirror image, right? It's not like exact copy, but it's very similar to like what goes on in America. And that's what the book wants you to see. It's like, this is a situation of imperialism, which is like all over the world. Okay, I will continue reading right where I left off here. The nation that oppresses another nation forges its own chains, wrote Marx. Socialists believe that the working class of an oppressor nation can't be liberated while oppressing another. But what if it also can't exist otherwise? What freedoms, rights, or benefits would it give up to protect its own existence? Socialists have a rich history of supporting national movements and struggles for democratic freedoms, insofar as they deal a blow to imperialism and oppression. Right, so what it's saying here is, if self-determination is dependent on the exploitation of others, this is not socialism. Okay, so what does that mean? I'll continue reading here. Socialists do not support self-determination in the abstract. We analyze the concrete situation in which the struggle for self-determination takes place. For example, Marx opposed the self-determination of the Confederate States of America because it was clear that the demand for a separate state was raised to preserve chattel slavery. Israel today is an active settler colonial project that relies on the continued dispossession and suppression of the will and rights of indigenous people. Palestinians are denied entrance to Israel, cannot return to their homes and lands, and are denied citizenship, equal rights, voting rights, and basic democratic civil liberties. So, yeah, what we're talking about, how, and that's important to understand. And I would just take that back to what I was talking about before with the working class aligning with elites or like the ruling class to get capital gain. But there's an expense paid by that. You're exploiting the people, you're denying the people their freedom, right, for your gain. And that creates chains for yourself too. So what are the chains that are created by the people who join in the oppressed? Well, those chains are the chains of capitalism, right? Meaning, like, you become part of this whole working machine to generate capital. Now you have to ask yourself, is there real happiness in that? Are you really rewarded? Well, you can't get luxury goods or monetary things. Inevitably though, these type of things don't provide happiness in a real sense. For example, what's initiated this conflict, this modern or current affair that's going on in Israel right now, when Hamas attacked Israel and killed 4,500 people and took all these hostages. That was a direct result. So that was a direct attack to the working class people who align with the ruling class, right? So that was a horror in and of itself. And so the response to that was the Israeli state, like, okay, we're going to attack, but their attack is, completely indiscriminate. They're taking out, children, civilians, killing way more than the initial Hamas attack. So what's happening here? It's a cycle, right? It's this cycle of violence that we get caught up in, right? And so the exploitation that is accepted causes violence amongst ourselves. Think of it let's look at the United States of America. Right. We have working class people that are aligned with white supremacy. Now, what happens with this? We have the insurrection of January 6th, right? What happened to a lot of those people? Those people are in prison. A lot of those people are in prison now. Right? We have to ask ourselves: do you really what do you really give up in this constant effort of nationalism, right? Of alignment with the ruling class to get certain capitalist gains. It's this constant struggle. It's this constant grind of constant denial of other people's freedom. And it's just never ending. You oppress people. The people who are oppressed often lash out in violence. The oppressor continues to lash out more in violence, and it just never ends, right? It creates this constant world of fear and domination, right? All at the expense of, temporary luxury goods, capital gain. And this is the bondage, right? The chains that even the exploiter receives. As opposed, if we just acknowledged each other as human beings and say, we're not going to exploit each other. Then this constant cycle of violence that just never ends. It stops then. And that's what this whole concept of socialism is this imperialist venture, these imperialist projects, they just result in wars that just don't end, right? And even the people that are financing the wars and working toward, the people who are manufacturing the weapons, like the people that work for Lockheed Martin. As the book says, a lot of the working class Jewish people that work in Israel work in arms development, right? And now, they're dealing with a lot of terrorism from the very people that they helped, they developed weapons to exploit those people. Right? Same thing here. I mean, you could just go on and on, right? Climate change is another thing, right? A lot of the people who, climate change is hurting everybody. Now, it's hurting people that are at the bottom end of the social economic class more, but it's still, I just heard a story the other day, people who have luxury beachfront property in Florida, their homes are just getting destroyed by climate change. And these are the very people who are the exploiters, like, right? So it hurts everybody, right? These are the chains, right? And this is what the book is trying to express, right? This idea of this is the result of like this imperialism. But let's continue. So what can we do about all this? Like, what is this like? Okay, we're in these chains. How do we break out of these chains? Like, what is there to be done? And then the book goes into that, charting a way forward. Because, you know, it's one thing to, that's the thing. We point out the problems, but where are the solutions? So, like, how do we move forward or progress? How do we break out of this problem? Well, you know, what it says is, okay, here's the thing. The book talks about a viable strategy for Palestine must draw the connections between the Palestinian struggle and the broader fight against capitalism and imperialism. As socialists, we are first and foremost internationalists. This is why we call for open borders, sanctuary for all, and an end to imperialism, which at its core strengthens and upholds capitalism by creating divisions based on nation, race, ethnicity, and religion. An internationalist struggle is one based on the emancipation of workers and the oppressed. Right? So it's saying like, okay, first things first, we gotta like understand what the problem really is. Right? We gotta understand what the problem really is. Mainstream media is like, oh, the problem is anti-Semitism. It's like, it's people going against the state of Israel. Everybody who's criticizes the state of Israel, they don't like Jewish people, where it's like, what's the real issue? The real issue is the state of Israel is a colonizer. It's an imperialist power that exploits its indigenous people, Palestinians, for capital gain. That's the problem. Right? This is not like an anti-Jewish issue. It's just an anti-imperialist issue is what it is. And so it's like we need to call it for what it is. Step number one. Okay. Until we do that, we can't even come close. And that's what it's saying, like a socialist introduction. You gotta like identify the problem for what it truly is. Now, after you do that, right, what else do we do? Well, it continues from that. It says, what's happening in Palestine is not a conflict, you know, rising tensions or a competing narratives. Israel is a settler colonial enterprise that extends far beyond 1967 and military occupation. What is at stake is a people's century-long liberation project, one that insists we look beyond the dystopian reality before us and the peace process mirage behind us. Through the struggle for Palestine, we recognize interconnected systems, a battle against imperialism and neoliberalism. All right. So that's it's just saying, recognize the problem for what it is, and we gotta look beyond. So how do we do that? It's saying, okay, we're seeing the problem. It's a dystopian reality. Let's not get caught up in that. We gotta look beyond that, and this peace process mirage that's going on with, oh, it's about like resolving anti-Semitism, which is a real issue, by the way. It's a real issue, but it's being everything is co-opted, right? Even like the rights of Jewish people, that struggle is being co-opted to fuel this colonial state. It's sad. It really is. How do we do it? But it is not enough to know. Okay, we must act, in italics. Gotta act. Okay, it is not enough to wag our finger. Shame on you, state of Israel. We must cut lines of complicity. Right? How do we do that? We continue to organize. On campuses, in local communities, inside unions, and out on the streets. Online too. You know, I've often tried to like go. I'm like, you know, I'm online too much. I need to go out the street. But online is important too. And at rallies, in churches, mosques, and temples. Okay, we confront our coworkers. Have tough conversations with relatives. Challenge artists. Push back. Challenge artists. Right. I'll just tell you straight up right now. the museum of there's a museum that fired a vendor because they were doing some charity for Gaza, and I'm like, no, that's messed up, man. You know, I like going to that museum, but I was like, that's messed up. Challenge them, push back on the academy, and knock on doors with the canvassing, right? We talk to shop owners, speak on panels, chair events, build mock checkpoints, and facilitate workshops. We create community that extends beyond Palestine, like here in the United States of America, where I'm from, envisioning what liberation for all looks like through action. Okay? Sometimes you just got to model it. Or you know what the saying, be the change you want, you got to model it. And it continues. So what does what do? Plug in. Show up. Show love. You know, LOVE, love. Conceptualize creative ways to take action. Attend a meeting locally. Make a flyer. Help organize a demonstration. Volunteer for a fundraiser. Research a divestment campaign. Coordinate a panel. Hold a sign at a rally. Be an audience member. Educate a friend. It just keeps going. Retweet. You can retweet. I guess it's what? Post now because it's called X. Share on Facebook or Instagram or Signal Boost online. Hello. Or join an organization. So often we are searching for the silver bullet solution or feel the need to master every aspect of a topic that we overlook doing something in the moment. It's important. And then it says, it is you. It is us together. It is time for us all to move. So it's you, it's me, and then it's to us together. We gotta figure. You gotta understand. It's a collective. You know, that's how we gotta come together in solidarity. So you know, and it's time for us to move. You know, it's time for us to move. So you know, I guess that's about it in terms of what I wanted to say. But you know, hey, that's what I'm going to do. You know, I do many things, but I wanted to make a video about this. I know a lot of people will be like, this isn't philosophy. Why are you doing this? I hate when you make videos about current affairs. Stop making videos about politics. But it's like, no, I want to make a change. So, and you know, I'm going to do my small part, my little drop in the river that maybe it'll make the ripple effects. And, you know, I also think this is very, you know, this does relate heavily with philosophy. And I think, yeah, if we don't apply philosophy to real world issues, then what is the use of philosophy? You know, I would say there's not much use to it. So that's what I would argue. And yeah, check out the book. The publisher is giving it out for free. That's how I got it. I just printed it out. And the publisher is actually giving out more books about Palestine and the history of Palestine and the struggle against the state of Israel and you know, its colonial project. It's got several books for free that you can just download. I'll link it below in case you just don't know anything about this issue. Books are a great way to learn about it. But so you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.